I've got 3 pieces for, I want to go over today, but I'll start with you all. Do you have questions for me? Any questions? No?
Oh,
Yes. Amy, please.
no, that's okay. Something I found myself kind of wondering about as I was responding to the questions. Um, I think I shared an example of trying to help a small group get started and kind of realizing that perhaps it didn't really gel because it was people who weren't necessarily in the same stage of life. Like they were around the same age, but some were married without kids, some were married with kids, some were single. And I think maybe the group just didn't really gel because of that. But then I also found myself wondering, but isn't that kind of like what we need to make happen to make church work? So like, do you think diversity is a good thing or not a good thing when it comes to like helping groups come together?
Wonderful that you asked this question. That was one of my points for this morning in some way. We, in Mainline in particular, we have a huge emphasis right now, and for the last few years, and I suspect it will keep for a few more years, talking about diversity and how not being diverse is not a good thing. Diversity is a value, okay, and so all these mix in together, right? So a lot of times we'll have our mission statements in churches will say things like we are a our mission is to be more diverse, or to make people realize or recognize diversity, to be more loving and whatnot. Those, everybody knows they're supposed to be more loving, right? And people are hearing this, what they hear often as rhetoric, that we should be more diverse. But the reality is many of us live in diverse communities. Walk into your school, and even though your church may be lily white, or maybe all black, or whatever, we still think we have to be diverse. What I found interesting, when the first time I worked I was a sub 6 weeks straight, though, in a middle school, and I was up on the 6th grade floor. And when you at the beginning of the year, they're like, all the kids are their friends, like there's this wide mix of kids walking together and having fun. Though within 2 weeks they had separated themselves racially. Randy, you get it right? Am I right on this one? You're on mute. You're on mute. Randy's in
Yeah, I
education.
got you. Yeah, I've had that experience. It's wild times. It takes me back.
Yeah.
Kind of makes me glad I retired from that age group.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm.
I still sub though, so yeah.
And the reality is they're all friends,
Hmm.
and I would say most, if not all of them, all the kids live in diverse communities, but we still tend to go with those that we identify as having the most commonality with us. Kind of a difference with that was our son in high school. He was the only white kid in his peer group, and I don't know, that was really when pro-reconciliation became such a focus for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And I remember our interim general minister and president was Chris Hopgood, and he was just up there almost berating us at this regional assembly, how we had to be more diverse, and our churches needed to be to represent the diversity of everything. And our son was the president of the regional youth group, and Britt, oh my gosh, he just tackled Chris. Britt is our son, tackled Chris Hopgood and said to him, like, here's a reality check for you, because Chris went and talked to the youth group, and he said, I'm the only white kid, and all of my friends, like, one of them's from Vietnam, one's from Philippines, 2 of them are what we would consider to be black, and we're friends, and so we're not having the same problems you seem to have. So, but, and diversity ought to be a value. Do you segregate yourself into, who your friend groups are? Are your neighbors ignoring their neighbor? The message there isn't you need to be more open, more diverse, more affirming, or whatever of other people. I mean, the message there, I mean, it's happening already. And the question is, how do you live within that diversity? How do you live with your neighbor who you, I don't know, that's having parties in the middle of the night, regardless of who they are. So more problem oriented. And I think our problem, what we see as problems aren't necessarily problems for other people. Wait, Amy, I'm going to come back because I see Mason's hand up there.
Uh,
Mason.
Good morning. This is jumping off of her statement, and what you've just said. My question is, when it comes to diversity in the terms of race, um, our region, much like others, and then our specifically our church, is really focused on like how do we get more racial diversity in the church, and I have a really big problem with that question,
Yeah,
because mostly because, and I'm not saying this is good or right, but like the culture of church is vastly different between the Black community and the white community, and there's no way to serve both
right.
without people leaving. And why should as a white church, why should we try to do that for them? Because we're gonna fail at it. We're gonna fail at it, and B, that's just gonna upset our members. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, it's just how it is. And so how do I get that point across? It's like,
Sure.
let's not try that because we're gonna fail.
Sure. Oh, okay. And so this, I don't know, not everybody's going to like this. Step on toes, some of you, and as you know, I don't apologize for toe stepping. Um, Look at African American churches and how many African American churches are talking about they need to become more diverse and add white folk to their congregations. They're not. They're not having that conversation. So why is it that white folk need to become more diverse, right? And same with Korean churches and Chinese churches. And that's that's just the way that is. I mean, exceptions are in places like I lived in inner city Atlanta, and our church was racist. That was in the 80s. I was there from 82 until 90. And even though we lived, gosh, the white population was 3% in the Lakewood Heights community at that point, and our church was all white. And we were visited by the NAACP, and I can tell you stories of horror. I have never seen racism like that. I had never seen it before, never have seen it again at that level, and threatened to come to violence. And had two Klans members that I know for an absolute fact saw the tracks, saw their certificate proudly displayed on their wall, that belonged to the Klan. And we were lily white, and God help you. Well, we had two Black men come to our churches in two interracial families, and as I say, it was disastrous. So that was an example of a like holding back against not being a diverse congregation. But a lot of the congregations there were diverse by their very nature of these are our neighbors. They were actually inviting their neighbors. So we say, in this interesting, we put a lot of effort and energy in preaching into how do we invite people that don't look like us when we're not inviting the people who look like us. All right, let's try that. I mean, how many of you are, Bill and I have been playing with statistics. We're here because he was the keynote speaker. He was the speaker, the facilitator, the presenter for the Great River Region's pre-assembly event. So being the stats person that I am, I went up to check out stats. In the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, the average worship attendance is 66. And, or no, I'm sorry, let me try again. The average participating membership of congregation is 66. Average worship attendance is 40. The national average, what's the national average? Is it 68, something like that, of worship? What's average participating?
Nationally?
Yes,
It's
for all denominations?
for all, that's national, that's all.
Okay, so
Not-
we fall
not
within,
just-
we fall within the average there, okay, at 66. Though 5% of our congregations have 150 plus members. 5%. I mean, what the hell does that say about us and what we're doing? We are not doing it. The majority of us are under 40 on Sunday mornings. How many of you are worshiping at 100 and above in your worship services? Any of you? Amy is, right? How many of you are worshiping at 75 and over, other than Amy? No, I'm not seeing hands, and I'm seeing shakes of the head. How many of you
I
are
am.
worshiping? Mason is. There's Mason. All right. Okay. So we got 2 now that are worshiping, I know, at 50 or higher. How many 50 or higher? Right. So I'm adding 3. I added 1, 2, Teresa. Right. Okay. What? Alicia had her hand up. Is that because I wasn't counting you, right? Okay. So what we're worried about is becoming more diverse. When, hello, could we just talk about how to grow beyond just grow with whoever, right? And we stand up there and preach, and we worry about not having more diverse. Then go invite someone who doesn't look like you.
Which is
Here he is.
a total waste of time, because when they get there, they're gonna say, this is not my tribe. I don't fit here. I need to go find someplace else. It's a waste of time to invite people who don't fit in your congregation. None of you, Amy, maybe perhaps, but not quite. None of you have so many resources you can afford to not have a return on your investment of your energy, your time, to reach people for Jesus Christ. Reach the people that are likely to say yes, that you can disciple, instead of spending time trying to reach people that are not going to connect with you and you can't disciple anyway. Sorry, had to step in.
So like I say, I've been reading the stats, and here's another what the hell question for you. I'm just in this righteous mood this morning. Why the hell are you not inviting people to your church?
There's no value in coming.
Right? Why are you not inviting anybody? Are you embarrassed of your church? Are you afraid they won't be welcomed? Will you not welcome them? Are you afraid that they won't like what they find there? So here's a question, and Teresa, I think it was Teresa I gave this question to this week. Why are you still at your church?
So, and I answered you. I don't know if you've had a chance to read my response.
No, I didn't. I haven't.
So when we moved, so I was my home church is actually Mason's current church. So I'm from Peoria, Illinois. I was born and raised in the Disciples of Christ Church. I attended the Peoria church up until about the time I was in high school. We used to drive from St. Louis to Peoria every Sunday for church. That's
Wow.
that was our church. And when my husband's military, we've been all over the world, and he was raised very hardcore Roman Catholic. And so once we got married, we kind of church shopped for where we felt like we were at home. And we both really fell back in love with the Disciples of Christ Church. And it's always been my home. It's always been my heart. It's always been where I've felt the most comfortable. And my husband was so accepted at the church we were attending in St. Louis that when we moved to Sikeston, it was the closest Disciples of Christ Church to the house. And we walked in, and my pastor from my youth was the head preacher at the time.
Cool.
And I walked in, and I sat down, and I was listening to, his name is David Nash. I was listening to him preach.
Oh my gosh, I love David. Sorry.
He raised me, like he raised me. So I listened to him preach, and he was telling a story about an old parishioner from a church in Peoria. And he was talking about, and for Mason, for you, it was Bill Presnell. Bill Presnell is my godfather. And he's telling a story about my godfather in trying to explain the Bible in this particular verse. And I'm like, I felt so deeply like God was telling me, this is where you're supposed to be. This is where your home is now. This is correct. You are in the right place at the right time. And I truly believe that. And when David retired, you know, my whole family came for his retirement, and he told me, he goes, God has a plan for you. Don't ever give up. And we had just started fostering, and my son, who is African-American, and he said, this church has never seen this before, but I promise you the love is coming. And he knew. And our new pastor came in from Oklahoma. His name is Jason Williams. He's amazing. He has continued to help us foster this culture of we've had 29 kids in our church that we have fostered, 29 kids, and none of them have been lily white. That's just not, Joe and I get drug cases and drug babies, and I've got one trying to climb me at the moment that she just doesn't know. She is mixed. And our church we had a couple families who at the time were running the education, and I use that in quotes, department for the little kids. And they were just very anti, if you are not blonde hair, blue eyed, they just didn't want to teach you. So I started doing things at the church for my kids. Yeah. And I invited all kids, and it's taken a couple of years, but yeah, that's my microphone, baby girl. But it's taken a couple of years, but they've kind of come to the point now where it's like, well, these kids aren't going anywhere, and they're really great kids. And these kids have such a severe love of God that the wall is coming down.
Okay.
So I have stayed because I want my kids to know that you can worship God anywhere you want, any way you want. It's your relationship with God. It's not other people's to tell you how to do it. And you shouldn't have to run away from a place that you feel love and comfort and safe for just the couple of people who don't like you.
So that's the key. And that's what I wasn't reading, I'm afraid, in your message, which is not you, that's me, probably, that they are feeling loved and they're feeling accepted, right?
This one she is really into the pawpaws right now. When we walk into church on Sunday mornings, she goes up to every older gentleman, and I will say 40 and older, because that's just what she decides is old. And she will hug them all. And she calls every one of them pawpaw. She's got like 50 pawpaws at church on Sunday mornings. My son is the potluck kid. He wants to know when we're having potluck because he likes to pick up everybody's plate and put them in the trash, and pick up everybody's forks and put them in the trash. And he'll tell you that God told him that he gets to serve other people because other people have served him. That's what he tells you. And he's 6. He's almost 6. And he knows. He has the most wonderful relationship with God. When we were fostering him, we were trying to find a quiet place where we could do visits with his biological mom before she disappeared. And I asked her, I said, where are you comfortable? She goes, I don't want anybody to see me. I said, okay. I said, how about at our church? You can come in the back door. We'll meet in the little nursery area. There's tons of toys. It's a quiet place. There's no windows from the outside. It opens to the courtyard so nobody can see you. And she's like, that'd be great. And so we did visits there. And so that's always been his safety zone. It's always been his happy place. And so even this morning, first thing, he's at a soccer game today, and he's like, is today Sunday? Are we going to church? Like, buddy, it's Saturday and you got a soccer game. And tomorrow he's going to miss church because they have a 9 a.m. soccer game. And I know it's going to break his heart. It's going to break his heart. But my kids feel so much love there, despite the few people who wish to push them out.
So here's what I hear in that. What I hear is you have a church that had some racist people, exclusive people, but it was them. And that was not the value, though, of your congregation.
Not at all.
Right. So that's the key there, right? It wasn't the value. And so she wasn't changing the culture. What they were doing was getting clear about what their culture is, and that the other was neither tolerable nor acceptable. And that's a key there. Instead of and it's like Mason has said, and Amy, I'm coming back around to your question was, we don't look for differences, we look for similarities, so that because really what we have to do is address problems and needs of people. Isn't that really what we mean when we're talking about a life-changing, transformative gospel and a Lord, right? Jesus changes your life. And so now we demonstrate how Jesus has changed our lives, and the ones that we can best tell about that are the ones who reflect our story or that we can relate to. When we lived in Yates Center, Kansas, right? Oh my gosh, I'd never been, until then, I had never been over the Mississippi River. And it was a rural community with they had less than 2,000 people in the entirety of the county. I'm like maybe 700 and maybe not even 1,000. I know people in Yates Center. Almost all of them were farmers, and it's the prairie hay capital of the world. I lived in a very upper middle class, or I grew up in a very upper middle class suburb of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, with a father who would not even drive through the south side of town to get to work, because he did not want us to see how people lived on the south side. And even though that was because it was the fastest route, I'd lived 12 years in inner city Atlanta, 16 years in inner city Atlanta. Talk about culture shock. And I would stand up there and preach, and I would teach, but I couldn't use the metaphors, things that they would understand. I tried to learn, when you talk about the good shepherd, like those guys get sheep, right? Not me. I'm like, they're looking at me like I'm a dodo bird. It's like fish out of water. I mean, what did that mean? And I know I was called there, but I was called for a different reason, I found, than I thought for what I was going there for. And I wasn't the one who was really going to be able to take that church to the level I thought I could help them, lead them to, because I couldn't even talk their language. Right. So we're looking for those similarities. If you haven't yet taken Dr. Bill's evangelism class, then, and you will, if you're going for your certificate, your CPM certificate in pastoral ministry, if you've already taken, I'm going to hearken you back and help you to remember. He talks about like the faces of Jesus. What are they? The 5 faces of Jesus. Who's Jesus's face, if you will, that you most relate to? What in Jesus's story? Who in Jesus's story do you most relate to? Right. For me, one of those stories is Mary Magdalene, at least the part of Mary who's an outcast, right? Or maybe even the woman who had the issue of blood, who was that outcast, and that it was coming up there and kind of sneaking into Jesus and coming into that church that morning in 1982. And just finding Jesus there in all kinds of different ways. So when I talk to people, when I meet people, the people I can have the deepest of conversations with are those people who have identified themselves as outcasts in some way. I very much relate to addicts who are not yet in recovery, or who live with addicts who are not yet in recovery, and I can talk about the difference Jesus made in their lives. So looking for those commonalities, looking for those similarities, when we're getting, and here's another piece I want to bring into this. We have demographics, but there are also psychographics, right? So when you look at your demographic your church's demographic information, and I don't in mainline churches, almost all of the mainline churches, your judicatory, right? Your adjudicatory is your denominational office. It's your presbytery, your synod, your region. They almost always have a subscription to It's a company that pulls demographics, but you can call them your presbyter, your bishop, your regional minister, and ask if they can get the demographics for your congregation, and they'll pull. Generally, it's like a 5-mile demographic, and you can see who lives in your neighborhood, who lives in your community, and then so those are basic demographics, right? But then psychographics, Mosaic, it's Mosaic who does these, are the ones that most of us have access to, and the psychographics can tell you things like where they get their news, right? What radio stations, local radio stations, are they listening to the most? They're what are they struggling with? They put them into, I don't know how many different groupings, like empty nesters, I believe is one of them. They're young parents struggling, young adults. They have these fun names for them. I haven't looked at them in several years, so I can't remember what their classifications are. So that gives you a better idea of who's in your community and what kind of questions they may be asking. Randy, is your hand up? If so, you're on mute. No. Okay, you were kind of stretched. Okay, there. Rearrange. Okay, so that's the information you want. Alicia, am I saying your name right? No, tell me, you're on mute. I can't hear you. I can't hear you. And you're not on mute. Is it Alicia? Alicia. Okay. I'll screw it up next time, I promise again. Alicia, you're talking about they're building a 55 plus community right next to the church or by the church. And that's beautiful. So, when Bill pastored up in Raytown, it's right next to almost a suburb, I guess you could call it. They'd hate to be called a suburb of Kansas City, but they are. We moved into a 55 plus apartment building, and I wasn't 55. I'm like, oh my God, but you can live there, but I'm 53. And so I had to adjust to this idea that, oh my gosh, I'm old enough to live in an over 50 community, right? And all these different kind of ways. We had to adjust to living in an apartment. We fortunately we kept our home in Columbia, so we didn't have to downsize, but it got us even thinking about, downsizing. It's like, I could live like this, not me. No way, not downsizing, not in this point. So what is going on over there? Are they empty nesters? And so we're looking for those commonalities. Now, another part though, is we tend to want to remold ourselves, not rebrand, but remold ourselves, reimagine ourselves as a congregation. Let us not forget who's in our congregation. So we can invite all the young families we want, because we have in our heads, we have to grow with young families. But if we don't have any young families in our church, we may be setting those people up, right? Can't be everything to everybody, but what can we offer? Maybe we can reach young families because we have a lot of empty nesters who need their baby fixes, right? And so they're ready to offer something like a daycare or after school or mentoring, right? So we can help in that way, particularly if that's what we've got. Maybe we're in an older community, but it's gentrifying. And that might be something we can move, or we can offer to those younger families that are moving in. That's where that can work for you. But you've got to have those touch points as you think about it. So don't try to become who you're not, because it's almost bait and switch. And a couple of realizations that hit me yesterday when Bill was presenting. He had said, which we so heartily believe, don't think that a contemporary worship service is going to grow your church, right? Because people who want to go to church for a contemporary service, they're already going to a church with a contemporary service, and probably a church that can really do a bang up contemporary service. If you've ever tried to put a band together, it's a nightmare for most of us. So to try and, try to become who you're not, it's like, please don't save yourselves, right? But you better be able to offer something better. And that was a real huge learning coming out of COVID. If we still want to live in COVID and then blame COVID. I think I said this last week or the week before. We still want to blame COVID for our low numbers in our worship service. Well, we have to get over it. The big question to ask yourself about that, about why people didn't come back, was what were you offering them that would compel them to come back, right? So where was your program? What ministries were you lacking? And if you look in terms of what you need, the basics that you need to be an effective church, you've got to have ways of welcoming them in. So that's worship is one of them, right? So inviting, how you invite, you have to have equipping or connecting, how you connect people in. And then you have to have discipling, right? How you're building disciples. So you invite, you bring people in, you get the basics, you're connecting them with other people, with the church, with God. You move into the deeper discipleship, and then you go, right? There's the mission, there's the Great Commission part of it. All right, but where are we spending our time? Well, we're doing a lot of talking about who we're supposed to be inviting. We're not inviting. We talk about it. We don't do it. You notice how we talk about God more than we talk to God, right? I have to atone for that. That's part of my confession on a real basis. Is like, Lord, I have to confess that I talked more about you today, or didn't talk about you very much today, when I actually talked to you when I most needed you. Last week, no, it was the week before, because I was sick most of last week and missed being at the school. I had a little boy ask me, he said, Dr. Chris, how is it that you're always so, he calls me Dr. T. How is it that you're always so calm and just so calm and cool? And I said, I almost said, I think I told you guys this. It's Jesus, right? Because I just did Jesus and have Jesus. But I didn't. I said, well, just, I pray a lot. And that afternoon, it was a zoo in there. I had kids in and out, and I couldn't get these 3 kids to just like do what they were supposed to do. And I finally had to raise my voice and just say, hey, we are not doing this. And I realized right at that moment, I had stopped talking to God, right? All that praying and being prayed up, it just left me. I had not stayed where I really strive to stay, in that place, right? We talk more about God than we do to God, and stay within that conversation. So we invite people, we connect, we disciple, and then we go. And who are we going to invite? So get off the conversations about who we need to invite and just invite. And connect with those that your friends or your church members have invited. That's connecting with them. I love going to churches, and I always sit behind people who don't have anybody sitting with them. Amy, you're unmuted.
Yeah, sorry, my dog started barking right when I unmuted.
You.
So back to the issue of diversity, though, like I do think it matters that we know people who aren't just like us, because that's how we build empathy, and that's how we battle a lot of those isms that I think are still really alive and well in our country. So I guess I'm not sure how you balance that. Like, how do you encourage people to get to know people who aren't just like them? And especially if you're in a small church, like you might be the only person in your demographic. I don't know, like it's almost like I feel like we have to kind of fight against that desire to just surround ourselves with people who just like us if we want to be church.
So then the question becomes, why aren't you as an individual inviting those people who don't look like you, right? And instead of making people do that or saying that this is what we need to do, then that lesser question, which is a greater question, more innate or intimate question, is why aren't you? And then see, people don't invite well, this is sad. I will say people don't invite because we tell them to, right? Do any of your churches still do Bring a Friend Sunday? Like, it used to be that all churches, Teresa, your church does, all churches, and particularly small churches, did Bring a Friend Sunday. But it was so, like, it got to where it never worked. So we stopped doing it in churches. And the bigger question is, why aren't you inviting? And is it so, I don't know. We live in diversity and in openness, and it's not, maybe the bigger question is, why aren't you coming to our church? Why aren't you coming to any church? Right? And if we're a magnetic enough church, if we're really offering what people's needs are, then they'll come to church. We'll feel more open about inviting them. But how are we reaching them? We're meeting needs. Right. So instead of, it's like, am I going to invite you because you're part of the GLBTQ community, or okay, what, or I'm going to invite you because you're Black. Okay. Thanks for noticing. Someone said to me one day, thanks for noticing. What needs do you have? How are we addressing what your needs are? And aren't needs often universal in many ways? What's it like to work too many hours and not be able to be home, or to have to juggle so many jobs? And then the question could become, why not? But it does come back. Mason, I see your hand. I'm going to go there in just a minute. It's like, you are going to end up having to rethink what music you're offering. If you're trying to reach, like, I know if you were trying to have a youth group with kids at Gentry Middle School that were African American, that are Black, then you're going to need to be playing like hip hop music, and music that I don't even know what the genre is. I think they call it gangsta or something, or rap music. Like, won't that go over? But not only won't that go over, who do you know that can play that music, right? Or that like, where's that music with the Jesus message? I'm sure it's out there, but how are you going to do that, right? It's how we're reaching people, being genuine with that. Mason, please save me here.
Well, to speak to your question, Amy, like, I don't know where demographically you are, but in my city, we're we're not Chicago, but we're not rural by any means. And so we have a great many of churches in our area, but we don't have a lot of interracial churches in our area. And the Council of Churches for Peoria eventually came together, and the white churches were asking how to, like, teach us about you and your churches and how we can do things together. And the Black churches literally said, like, it's not our job to teach you about our culture. It's not our job to do that. It's your job to learn. And so what we've done is we've just started doing things together, whether it's fellowship or service to the community, and just by the micro conversations that naturally happen within those things, that's how we've learned about Black culture and whatnot, and how we came to the conclusion, or at least the few of us that did it, was like, we're a white church and we're not going to be anything other than a white church, and we shouldn't try. Now that message hasn't unfortunately gotten to the people who need to hear it in my church, but it's there. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but that's how we've started to bridge that gap in our communities.
Yeah, I think I'm talking less about creating diversity and more about like dealing with the diversity that we already have, which is in some ways kind of minimal, but it's like, stage of life things or just worldview kind of things that, if we don't listen to and learn from each other, then we're just kind of siloing ourselves and we're not really like taking advantage of the diversity that's within our church.
There you go. There you go. Okay, so when we start this, what I'm hearing is racial, ethnic diversity, and now you're there. Okay, we're back to what are the questions? What's the psychographic? What are people like struggling with? What is it that's on their minds? I just saw a piece on Good Morning America this morning about this new dad, and he was feeling really, really isolated up in New York. And so he just put it out there on Facebook, and one of his friends then posted it. And now they got, I think it's called like the Dad Stroll Club or Stroll Group, and they get together once a month with the strollers and their babies in one of the parks. And they said the first time out, they had 20 guys from the 5 boroughs coming together to be part of that. And now it's hit national. And I keep thinking, my gosh, they're going to have like 100, 200 guys there next time they're together, because that's their commonality. So when you look at your friends out there, they're asking for prayer, or they're putting up there like, hey guys, here's this. What are they writing? What are they needing? And if you're preaching, if you're one of our preachers, then do a sermon series on that, right? We've got to start addressing the needs. And then, through that we touch, right? So we want to move, we want to touch, we want to move, and we want to inspire people. And pieces will begin to fall in place, right? How do we do this? One of the ministries, I ended up leaving Bellevue Christian before I could go anywhere with this, was for women who'd been abused in the younger years of their lives. Over the course of, it was less than a month, I want to say it was a couple of weeks, I have 5 different women make appointments with me because they'd been abused as children. Blew me away. And I just knew God had done that for a particular reason. And I asked one of the women, I said, would you at all be interested if we did something where we could do kind of this confidential group where we could talk about that? And what I saw in all of them was they were like stunted at that age of their first encounter. And so, here was this successful woman who was in her 70s, and she was stuck at age 12, right? She'd been operating out of that. Her whole life was reflected out of that. Okay, well, I'm not going to sit there and say to her, Jesus can make it all better, but I know that Jesus can help do healing within her and can help her to process that there are people who specialize in that. How can we as a church, begin to address that, help them find that strength and that resource in ways that they want to share that then with other people. Jonathan, hand is up, please.
Yeah. Amy, one thing that we did, we are sharing space now with another church, another disciples congregation. They have the upstairs, we have the downstairs. And at a potluck is a really good way to make people mix. And we made it kind of a game where everybody had to draw a number when they came in, and that was the table they sat at. So it mixed people that wouldn't necessarily mix. So that's just an idea that worked for us.
Yeah. So, which brings me to another point, and it's, you've heard me say it, and you'll hear me say it again. You've got to be strategic and think, plan through. Alicia, did I say it right this time, Alicia? It's that, okay, we have this idea for a ministry. Let's look at what that might look like. Let's start to do some homework with that. What might those 55-year pluses be looking at? How might we in some way reflect that? How could we possibly provide a service to them? How could that be a ministry? Now, yeah, we think we could do that. What's that going to look like? What do we see in fruition? I love this way of planning. What do we see, envision now, knowing it probably isn't going to look anything like that when you start like moving along, but what would that ideal be? Now let's back it up, right? What would we need to do to be there in that place and or at this in bringing this? And one of the best methods for doing that is to get poster board and then draw we do it in sixes, so it would be 6 months. And so I'd have like the top January, February, March, April, May, June. You could do it in fourths, and then get heavy sticky post-it notes and just start writing down like this. We would need to have these in place. So you might use blue or something. We would need to have these pieces in place at this point, and then start to break it down and use that in a different color or smaller, different color post-it, and just start putting them on there, because then you can move them as you need to do that. You may say, oh, we thought, in April, this would be our benchmark in April. We think September would be the better time to do that. And so then you can start to move forward. You want to bring a team together and make sure you have those strategists and those tacticians and logisticians on there, people who are able to move you forward, know what your needs are. But plan, strategy, and measure all along the way. Right. Randy, I think that's part of what your challenge is, that you brought two churches together and didn't put all those pieces into place. And there's a whole piece around transition. What we tend to do is see where we are and where we're going, and we don't account for the transition in between, which has to do a lot with emotions, feelings, people who don't want to come along. William Bridges, he's deceased now, wrote a book called Transitions, and it talks about the middle. And so how we help people get from one place to another. And we'll talk about change. And what we don't do is deal with this very murky and often very painful center. We don't address the grief, blah, blah, blah. So psychographics and psychographics, plan. Who's your target? And people hate that. Again, if you haven't had my bill, well, you've probably heard him talk about avatars, right? Your avatar is who your target is. And people who say, well, we don't like to target, targeting is bad. Well, hello, look at who's there. I mean, you're already targeting. You sing out of a hymnal, you're targeting people who like to sing hymns. Okay. And maybe I don't know. We all look like this, that's who you're targeting. We're rural, right? When that question, what's your congregation look like, right? What's your congregation's composition? And that's who you target. You preach to that. You teach to that. So who is it that you're trying to reach, and then get to the psychographics and then figure out how you're going to do that. So Randy, you talked about you're able to teach now 3-4 weeks in a row. They're getting one continuity, which is so important. and then also with the continuity, you're bringing, you can do, if you can't do it yet, you'll be able to, if you can all just come like, oh, Randy, he'll teach, next week, rather than saying, hey, Randy's got the month of December, and then Randy can plan for December and these bridge messages. Where do you want people to be? And Amy, maybe that's part, as you're looking at, hey, who are we inviting? I'm going to just keep bringing it back to evangelism, right? That question, who are we inviting? Like, what's that psychographic? It may be a demographic, but it may be a psychographic. And I'll say that psychographics are more important than demographics, because when it comes to the individual, they need to know it makes a difference. Why give up your Sunday morning? Teresa, there are a whole lot of people that are giving up their Sunday morning to take their kiddos to soccer, but they would never get up in the morning to go to church when there isn't soccer, right? Go out there, and when you drive to church tomorrow morning, look and see if it's not raining. Whatever you drive by, who do you see outside? Because rather than going to church, now they might have gone to Saturday evening service, if you have a church with Saturday evening service, or maybe they're going to they went to an earlier service, right? But who's out there mowing their lawn? Obviously, it was more important for them to mow their lawn than it was for them to go to church. If you want to reach kids, oh my gosh, I did a consult for a church when I was on regional staff. I went and visited this church, and there were these 3 kids who were riding their bikes down the hill at the church. This is on Sunday morning, like 30 minutes before Sunday school. They couldn't have children's Sunday school because they didn't have any children, but there were 3 kids riding their bikes down the hill, and somebody came out and yelled at those kids and ran them off. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what do you have to do to get them to ride their bikes down your hill and into your front door? Like, let's be real about y'all. You're sitting here talking about you want children, but they're not here. Okay, so why aren't those people there? And do you not want to know what their problems are? Go and ask them. Do you want to know what the problems, like, really want to get to the psychographics in your community? Go talk to the school board or the school superintendent. Talk to the president or the vice president of the school board. Go talk to members of the school board. Why did they run?
Chamber of Commerce.
Go to the Chamber of Commerce. Talk to the police chief and the fire chief. Go talk to the head of your DFACS office.
Every politician, your city councilman, your county councilman, they're politicians. They know everybody. They're the ones to talk to. They're the networkers. Principals
of schools. You know what? Negate what I just said about the school superintendent. Go talk to the principals of the schools.
Superintendent.
Yeah. Well, ours has its own agenda, but I won't say that. I did. Yeah, go talk to the principals.
From someone who works at a school, if you really want to know about demographics in schools and diversity and which elementary schools are closest to your church, you want to talk to the system coordinator for the district, because they have all the numbers.
Oh,
got it.
I mean, that's literally what I do every other month. The entire school year is report those numbers back to the state.
I love it. I love it. I also love talking to the principals, and saying, if we were able to help you in some way, how could that be? Some of you have schools like right down the street from you, maybe. Yeah, Alicia does. I love this. I forget where it was, but this one church on certain school days, the men in the church would go and they would open the doors of the school, like they got permission, right? But open the doors of the school and welcome the kids to school so that they were a face there. When I served in Winder, Georgia, we were right across the street from the high school, and we were lucky enough to have the drama teacher as one of our members, and her husband had been the band director before he had passed on. And her son was this incredible musician, and she was able to work permission to bring things like the xylophone over across the street. And then, so we had kids coming and then got involved in our youth program that were never, had never gone to church, but they did that because we were able to include them every few months in the service. And then our kids got more comfortable with inviting their friends who weren't musicians, and we grew a program out of that. Be creative. What are the needs? Talk to the people other than yourself. because you know, or you think you know. And a lot of times we have been Christians for a long time. We think we know, but we may be in touch, but we may be out of touch because we've been Christianized in our minds, right? We get the sermons every week and we're kind of going in this direction. But go talk to other people and get a reality check. And that's particularly important if you don't have kids in the school or grandkids, or they live someplace else. And what, our daughter in Tacoma, what she deals with in her stuff is very different than her brother and sister who live in Columbia. They're dealing with two completely different issues. I think they're gonna vote differently, very differently, in the election this coming week. And a lot of that is because of their life experiences in this place in this time, like what they're seeing as most problematic. And what's most problematic in Kat's life is very different than what's problematic in Shannon's life, which is somewhat different than what's problematic in Britt's life. And Britt and Shannon live 12 minutes apart. Any of this making sense? Amy, does any of this help in some way? Yeah. Okay. We got two.
And like, maybe if we're trying to work within the group we already have, we have to help them identify what they have in common. So like, you don't want to select a curriculum about marriage if everyone isn't married, but like everyone can relate to prayer maybe, or yeah, no, I get that.
If you've got a Sunday school class, that could be a good question to start with. Just write down, you write down your like 5 most pressing issues, or your 3 most pressing issues. And we'll come back next week, do it towards, the last 10 minutes or so. And that could generate a conversation. Probably won't take 10 minutes, but hey, write these down, and let's go back next week and see how alike and how different we are. Okay? Because Jesus makes it different. We really want to bring this home. So let's figure out how to streamline our conversations. Because this is how Jesus has changed my life. Or maybe Jesus hasn't changed your life because you didn't need your life to be changed. But this is how, this is why I choose Jesus. Those of you who had me, well, none of you would have had me for that class in world religions that I got to teach for a session years ago. That question every week was, why Jesus? What difference does it make? But this has been years ago, and I still stand by this. I was at Winder then as associate, and the evangelism committee asked me to do a workshop on the commission. This was for the region at their pre-assembly event, and they asked me to do a workshop on growing a youth ministry. I said, good Lord, you don't want me to do that, because like I'm not a youth minister. And they're like, but your portfolio includes youth, and you're growing the heck out of like you're doing a youth ministry there at Winder. And so I'm like, okay, you got to have the perfect things, because I'm thinking of all these workshops I went to, when I was up and coming and coming up, and about youth ministry. And I walked in, and Group magazine was like this huge thing, and Group, it was like the key non-mainline catalog for youth groups. And so I brought in all of these catalogs, and have magazines and stuff. And I just tossed them out there. And I said, so if if you came wanting ideas and how-tos and all this other stuff, have at it. Like, here are resources, and I'm not going to go through. Rather, here's what I want you to do. I want you to get a piece of paper. You don't have a piece of paper. Here's some paper, and here's some pencils, pens, wherever you need. And on one side of the paper, I want you to write, this is how my life is because I know Jesus. And on the other side of the paper, I want you to write, this is what my life would be like without Jesus. And for the rest of this time, that's what you're going to work on. So you got 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it was. Then at halftime, I'm going to tell you, turn the paper over and work on the other side. Because you want to grow youth group, that's what's going to be. You need to know. And it's not just a youth group, it's an adult group, it's any group. Why do you need Jesus? Or not, why do you need? Well, bleh, bleh, bleh. What is your life like because of your relationship with Jesus, right? And what would your life be like if you didn't know him? If you didn't have a relationship with him? Choose your language, right? That's that in a nutshell. Learn to communicate it, ask your people that, and help them to figure it out. And knowing the psychographics will help you with how you tell that story, how you connect him into their story, into their life. This is how your life is. You're trying to figure out, like, what does your life mean when you've been a dad or a mom for all of these years? What does it mean that you are now 55? What's your life like because you just moved out of your house? I didn't know this until recently. Three of my dear friends are in their late 50s. They average between, or not average, they are between no, Beth just turned 60. I've known Beth for several years, like 55, and Sherry, who would have been 70 when she was 55. And they moved to new cities because their kids had grown, moved out, and they were switching jobs and they didn't know anybody. And both of them, even still now, 3-4 years later, we're having conversations about how do you make friends? Like, where do you go to make friends when you're, okay, in this case, women, when you're a woman in your late 50s, your 60s, your 70s, because your kids, you don't go where your kids are. They don't want to go hang out in the bar. And when you try things, another thing for women is that as we age and get more into our 50s, we become invisible. And just go look at it. There's studies that are being done on that. When you're younger, like people who look at you, men, I'll just go with men, but men will notice you generally. And then when you get older, they don't notice you anymore, right? Where you're thinking about retirement, like all these things, right? You're getting ready to be 65, and now all of a sudden you have all this stuff coming about Medicare, and everybody and their brother wants to help you. Like, how do you sort that stuff out? That's something we can do. We can talk about that. That's another reminder that you're being seen, you're aging, but you're being seen as old, or what's been defined as old. Right? So what's going on in that over 55 community, and who else in your church might be handling that? So this is what my life is like now. But because I know Jesus, this is where that resource is. But what my life like might be my life. Like I can tell you what my life was like before Jesus, right? I was an addict, active in my addictions, my alcoholism, even though I'd been a Christian for years before I became sober. But that was a deepening of my relationship. That's part of that. Yes, my life got stronger. Okay, so there's homework. As if you don't have enough to do in this class, let alone anything else in your lives or other classes that you're taking. But think about that. This is how my life is because I have a relationship with Jesus. This is what my life would be like if okay. Let's see. Seeing some faces. Alicia, would you pray us out today? Oh, wait, I hope we can hear you. No, we can't. Oh my gosh. Okay. I promise next week. Amy, guess what, Amy? You were like right up on top of Alicia today. So we're going to call on you.
Okay. All right, let's pray. I thank you for this time together, and I just pray that as we continue to grow and learn, you would give us passion and energy and excitement to see the potential that is in our churches and in our communities, to just help more people know that you love them so deeply. And I just pray that as we go throughout our week, that you would just help each person here feel your presence in a really close and special way. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. All right, y'all have a really great week. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the conversation and all the insight.